Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be continuing along through the journey, through the book Atomic Habits by James Clear today, talking about Chapter 20, the downside of creating good habits. If you guys remember, a couple weeks ago, we went over Chapter 19, which was the Goldilocks rule. And in this chapter, we talked about how you need to choose your habits very wisely. You can't have something that's so easy, but you can have something that's very difficult to achieve, or else you will get discouraged and you won't want to pursue that habit anymore. So we talked about this Goldilocks zone where a habit or a task is just difficult enough to draw your interest, but it doesn't push you away. It keeps you wanting to come back and keep on trying to achieve whatever goal or task that is. But it's not so easy that you can just finish it right away and just say, yep, I'm done with that. And you didn't really learn much from it. So that's what we talked about last time. And I apologize. I know it's been a couple weeks. We didn't have a video last week. I was on vacation, but back at it this week with the second to last chapter of Atomic Habits. So let's just jump right into this chapter. When you know the simple, you can then know the advanced details. So habits are great. Habits are great, but they do come at a certain cost. So in the beginning, you start a new habit and you're doing everything right, and you can see your skill set increasing, whether that's you're getting faster, stronger, you're getting better at a certain skill set for your job, you're getting better at writing, you're getting better at reading, etc., etc. But over time, it can come at a cost. Over time, you get caught in a certain rhythm. And if I can bring a connection back to a book that we did with Winning in Mind, where you repeat something so much that it ends up being something that goes into your subconscious mind that you don't really have to think about anymore, which is a good thing. In the field of play, you need to have something practiced so much that you can just call on it whenever you need to in the field of play, whether that's in archery or in golf or in basketball with a free throw, etc. But when setting goals, what James talks about is that sometimes this can be a detriment to your growth. What ends up happening is that when you get caught up in just a rhythm, you end up doing mindless repetition. So yes, you do in the beginning get very good at a habit, but then all of a sudden that good is good enough. You think things are just dandy the way they are, and you end up going on autopilot. You basically get used to things. You get used to the way things are, and you don't really end up evolving from that. And James draws a distinction here between reinforcing habits and improving habits. I think in the beginning, if you have a habit, it's improving yourself. You're improving on your skill set. So if your habit, you want to read 10 pages a day, and that's great. And maybe for like a few weeks, you meet those goals and you meet those objectives, and you're reading 10 pages a day. But at some point, it's reinforcing itself. At some point, after like a few months, all you still read is 10 pages a day. You don't really challenge yourself to then move on to, 15, 20 pages a day, etc. So that's where there is this challenge, or there's this danger of habit making, that you can kind of dig yourself in a rut and you can kind of get stuck. So what James talks about is not getting stuck. How not to get stuck is that you need to move on to like a higher overarching goal, or what he would call here is mastery. So you take those little individual habits, and any of these little individual habits that you're doing build up to some sort of mastery. And he's got this equation here that he talks about in the book, which is habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery. So once you have the building blocks, you should then try to be producing effort towards the next habit or towards the mastery of an overarching theme. If you are reading 10 pages a day and then all of a sudden you're 15, 20 pages a day, well, that's great. But now your next step should maybe be to comprehend and understand that book that you're reading, or maybe dive even deeper into that topic of that book that you're reading. That could be one example. So as he writes, or as is written here in the PowerPoint slide, mastering one habit is just the first step towards mastering an entire field of study, of work, or an endeavor. So build upon those atomic habits. Don't let them keep you in that same spot. Obviously, improve on them. Whatever your habit is in the beginning, reading 10 pages a day, going to the gym for an hour, yes, and that's great. And then all of a sudden you start to see your weight shed. But after a while, it's going to be harder to lose weight. Maybe after a while, you start to try to improve your skill set. Maybe you attempt doing Olympic lifts, something a little more challenging. Maybe you attempt to get faster on the track or faster in a certain sprint. And, it evolves from there. So now you just went from your habit being, hey, I'm going to lose weight, lose 10 pounds. Okay, then you build from that. Maybe you lose 15, 20 pounds, but then ultimately at the end of it, you're mastering being an athletic performance event. You are working your way towards becoming an athlete. And you see how you went from just one small habit to now you're mastering athletic performances in the weight room or on the track, in track and field, etc. So very, very important to do. You don't want to get stuck. You want to keep growing. You don't want to let your habits consume you. So what do? How else can you do this? Well, you can do what James talks about here in reflecting and reviewing, R&R. R&R, what's the usual abbreviation stand for? Research and R&D is research and development. But here, R&R, reflect and review. Just a little tidbit for you guys. But continuing forward, we have an anecdote by James. I know usually he starts off the chapter with anecdotes, but here, a little bit later in the chapter, he brings up an anecdote of the 1986 Los Angeles Lakers. So this is an American basketball team of the NBA, National Basketball Association. And the LA Lakers, they have a storied legacy. They're one of the best teams in the NBA, one of the best franchises. And in 1986, they're coached by a guy named Pat Riley. These are the teams that have, Magic Johnson on them. Pretty sure they had like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on them as well. And in 1986, they had like a very good team. Supposedly the best team in basketball history. Some pundits were saying they were really, really being hyped up. Well, that year they ended up losing in the Western Conference Finals. So Pat Riley, he gets a little bit upset. He doesn't really want to hear the excuses in the offseason. He develops a way for them to reflect and review and get a sort of glimpse into how they are actually doing. So he comes up with this thing called CBE, or Career Best Effort, which is essentially a score that is assigned that reflects your best efforts spiritually and mentally. And it's not just about scoring the most points. It's about giving the best effort and doing everything you can to help your team win, basically. So it's calculated by adding up positive numbers like points and rebounds, subtracting the negative numbers like turnovers, and then divide that by the number of minutes played. This number is then compared to past games and other players at the same position. So this is a way after a game to reflect and review what you are doing right and reflect on how you can get better and comparing yourself to how you did the previous 10 games and comparing it to other players at your position as well. And this is a very interesting tactic. I know that there are other people who would say comparison is like the thief of joy or something like that. Comparison can lead to a very dark road when you're just comparing yourself to every single person, right? All of a sudden you start to think that you are less than. So I think that sometimes it's not the best to compare yourself to other people. I know there's a quote out there that says, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who somebody else is today. So maybe sometimes it's better if you are going to compare to what you did previously. Maybe not what other players are doing at the same position. I get it from an athletic perspective that this works because NBA, all these guys are the top basketball players in the world, right? But if you try to do that, you're comparing yourself to these high-level athletes and you're just trying to lose 10 pounds. Well, maybe not the best comparison, right? So just be careful with that, with comparing yourself. And that's all I'll say about that. Let's move forward. So they install CBE in that off season or what have you in the beginning of the season of the next season after the NBA Finals they lost, and the Lakers ended up winning the championship that year. Who would have thought? And they actually ended up winning it the next year too. So they went back to back. I think James says that this was the first time in NBA history, or first time in 20 years up until that point that an NBA team won back-to-back NBA championships. So pretty inspirational, all from implementing this CBE and reflecting and reviewing on everything that they were doing on the basketball court. So improvement is not just about learning new habits, but it's about fine-tuning them too. When you reflect and review, you make yourself aware of any mistakes that you're making so that you can then correct them for the future. So you spend time on the right path, but then you course correct where you need to. And sorry about that, guys. The PowerPoint went a little haywire there. But you have to at some point do some sort of comparison. And like I was saying before, probably a little bit better to do it with yourself because you need to see if you're headed on the right track. And if you're not headed on the right track, well, then you need to kind of course correct and see where you need to go. I mean, you can do this even when you're not achieving your habits, right? If your goal is to lose 10 pounds and still after maybe like a few months you still haven't, well, reflect and review on what you're doing. What are you eating? What exercises are you doing? How often are you exercising? Spend time to reflect and review on why you haven't achieved those goals yet, or spend time to reflect and review on, are you moving past the original habits or the goals that you selected? So this is something that James talks about. He does two things every single year. He reflects on his progress, and then he reflects on his core values. So every year he lays out these questions and he lays out answers to these questions. And he basically does this to remind himself on the track that he's on, and then also to remind himself on if he's going towards the identity that he wants to become. So he asks himself these questions to reflect on his progress. What went well, what didn't go well, and what did I learn? And then he asks himself these questions to reflect on if his identity is still aligned with the direction that he's going, or rather, flip that. Is the direction you are going still aligned with the identity that is at the end of that path? So what are your core values that drive my life and work? How am I living and working with integrity? How can I set a higher standard in the future? Basically, we need to make sure that what he's making sure is that he is still he still has goals that align with his identity. When he reflects and reviews, he just wants to make sure that that's still the identity that he wants to be. So if you're trying to lose weight and you want to feel better, you want to feel like somebody who is mobile and very pliable and strong, is that still your identity? And if it's not, then maybe you need to course correct a little bit, reflect and review. That's all that James is trying to say here, is that you need to be able to see where, I guess first off, see where your mistakes are and if you're not achieving your goals. And then if you are achieving those goals, are those goals that still matter to you? Do they still align with your identity and who you want to be? So again, just to drive this point home, habits in the beginning are great. They begin to form your identity as somebody who is somebody who you want to be. Because those are the best habits. This is going back all the way to the earlier chapters of this book. You want habits. It's not just about making the habits, but it's about becoming a new person, which is great. You want habits like that. And in the beginning, you need habits like that. But after a while, your identity hardens, and then it's hard to evolve past that because habits become stale. They become very repetitive after you start to get very, very good at them, or they come easy. And then it's time to grow out of those habits. Maybe you become a little too prideful of who you are and you refuse to adapt. But the really important thing is you don't let one single belief define you. You cling a little too tight to something and you become brittle. And there is a really, really good poem that he includes in this section from Lao Tzu, where basically Lao Tzu, the most important thing I think in the poem is that the hard and stiff will be broken and the soft and supple will prevail. And he goes on, he gives examples, men are born soft and supple, but when they die, they are stiff and hard. So you want to be soft and supple and be able to adapt and form to new things. If you are very tight and you are very brittle, then you break, basically, and you're not able to adapt. So redefine yourself. This is something that James talks about in the book that can be very, very difficult for people who had an identity before and maybe were masters at something before. Somebody maybe like a veteran who was a master at their craft in the military, or a former athlete that was, again, a master of their craft in professional football or basketball or baseball or soccer. But once that journey ends and you retire, then you have to kind of switch identities a little bit. You need to redefine yourself for your path forward. You can't just be that person that you have known for that period of time. So he talks about how you can reframe your identity. If you're an athlete or used to be an athlete, you could say, well, I want to become the type of person who is mentally tough and loves a physical challenge. If you're a soldier, you could say, oh, I'm the type of person who is disciplined, reliable, and great on a team. And then you bring that new identity with you to your next adventure. So to summarize, again, habits, very powerful. We've gotten through this whole book talking about how habits are very, very important. Setting goals, setting very positive habits. Yes, it's all great, but they can also backfire on you because they lock you into ways of thinking while the world changes around you. Holding on tightly means that it's harder to grow out of that identity that starts to form, so it makes it harder to evolve past that. And the way to get past that is basically to reflect and review. Reflect and see where exactly you can improve, where you can maybe form new habits and start to gain a mastery of this field or path that you're on, and then review and see if everything is still aligned with your identity. This then allows you to be more aware of how you're doing, where you're going, and if that is in fact where you want to go. And that's going to do it, guys. That's going to do it. Thank you very much for listening. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Sorry again, I know this video came out a week late, but we'll be back again next week with the final chapter from this book, and then I'll probably take a little bit more time off to decide what the next book is going to be. Maybe, I know some people will probably say I should get back to the JavaScript videos as well, so I'll do that. I have a Patreon now. I'm still trying to decide what I am going to do with it. I do want to post these PowerPoint slides because I know some people have advocated that I post them, and I certainly will. I'm going to try to make as much of this stuff free as I can, but I think going forward, some stuff I probably will put some sort of fee towards, whether that's subscribing to the Patreon or maybe just sending a little bit of money, and that way you can purchase like the PowerPoint slide for not a lot of money, something like that. So that's to come in the future. Still trying to decide what I want to do with the Patreon. I actually might start to put some of the podcasts on Patreon as well. Maybe just have the clips on YouTube, but also have the full episodes on Patreon. I just had little trouble with YouTube. One of my interviews that I did with Nuclear Caudillo, which you can still find on Spotify and Apple and other podcast platforms, but on YouTube it was removed for violating terms and conditions in the community guidelines. So might start do that just to be safe, and just put clips of certain things on YouTube from the podcast like I normally do, but full episodes on Patreon. So we'll see what happens, but thank you guys very much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions. And my name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.